is Armine. My name is Armine Matansian. Good evening, everyone. I am the second vice president of NAMI Tri-Valley, and it is my honor and joy to run the general meetings where we bring a guest speaker monthly to this incredible platform where we all get to learn, to feel, ask questions, help ourselves, help our loved ones. Before we even get started, I want to remind everyone, if you're here, you probably know about our website, namitrivalley.org, all one word. Wealth of knowledge. Any questions you have anywhere, our admin, Quinn, is our joy, and she's here for all of us, including you. Marcia, our president, Marcia McGinnis, most of you know her. All of the board, we're all listed on the website. Feel free to take the time to look around, anything we can do to help. We have several programs, family to family, one of the serious ones that helps a lot of family members. All of us gone through it. And we have a class coming up soon. So look into it, sign up if needed. Also, as a series of monthly meetings, I just want to, before I will start off on this one, I wanted to talk about upcoming. We generally hold our meetings the second Tuesday evening. And since COVID, we've gone on Zoom and we're finding a lot more practical, both for attendees and guests and all of us. So it's about connecting. We have great speakers coming up next 2 months as well. So we have Nisha Becton from Pathways to Wellness, who brings not just her knowledge of the field and medical side, but also the whole mental illness from business to patient care to everything you can think of. Very knowledgeable, and not just the industry, but the whole Alameda County. Don't miss out. With her, you never know what you're going to learn. The second important guest of the year is our own doctor. We say our own doctor because he's been with us for more than 20 years, and that's Dr. Kostalnik. We call it Ask the Doctors. Everybody's favorite, and we always learn something new, no matter how much we think we know. So, with that said, please don't hesitate to look through our NAMI Tri-Valley website and sign up as a member. I don't know if everyone here is a member. We encourage it. All our services are for free. We would like you to be a member. It's all anonymous. Your identity is confidential. So all that said, we need your support just like you're getting our support. So let me just ask if Marcia would like to say a couple of things, or should we just get started?
Armine, you said it all. You took the words out of my mouth, so you did a fine job. And just reinforcing, come be a part of NAMI Tri-Valley, come own it. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your voice. It's not ours, it's all of ours. We are the community. So thank you. That's all I need to say.
Thank you. So with that, let's talk about today's guest, today's topic, and get started. So behind all this joyful smile that we come across composed, there is a grieving person inside us, because we're here because of our family members, because of what we've gone through. Probably might be a little too much for an average person out there, but that said, when we're caring for our loved ones, we never have time for ourselves. We just always think, one day we'll get there. One of the biggest positive for me being in NAMI Tri-Valley is not the support I give, but the support I get. It's a two-way street, folks. So the speaker we're going to meet today, I heard her speak on the suicide prevention workshop, which is another program that we run here. And when I heard her speak, I got goosebumps, and I said, stopped afterwards. I said, you're going to come talk to us. You're going to talk to NAMI Tri Valley, our community, so we can not only hear you, ask questions. Okay. So Cris Rita is going to talk to us about the grief and loss. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to have her talk about the topic, but I would like to say a couple of things about her. Cris received her master's in psychology counseling from University of San Francisco. She began working with Crisis Support Services of Alameda County in 2005 as a volunteer and the 24-hour crisis line. She has held several different positions during her time in Crisis Support Services of Alameda County, including crisis line volunteer, crisis overnight supervisor, and crisis line trainer, having taken over 11,000 calls on the crisis line. That's not a little number, folks. Cristina joined the community education department as a health educator in her Teen for Life program. Currently, she is the community education a community training manager. Her responsibilities include curriculum development for community suicide prevention, training workshops, and providing workshops in the community. So the thing I'm going to say next is the one that surprised me. Cris has has training in psychology autopsy. Was very interesting concept, and I'm hoping she'll cover that because I'm going to let her do the explanation. I heard that myself. Um, so at this point, I'm going to turn the floor to her. Wonderful lady. You're going to be surprised if you didn't know her. A lot of us know her. So without further ado, let's welcome Cris. Thank you, Cris, for being here. This session, by the way, is being recorded. If you do not want to show yourself, please hide the video. Don't know much we can do about the names. We will share it for those on our website that are interested. This is a training material. Okay? And the Q&A will be recorded as well, but if you don't want to, let us know.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, first of all, Marcia and Armeen. Sorry,
Armin, that's
butchered
fine.
your name. Thank you for inviting me. I've been really looking forward to being able to talk about this with all of you. NAMI, I have a very special place in my heart for me. Things I learned about the community when I started with one who was involved with NAMI. And she shared with me a lot about what your group does locally and nationally and how important it was. And so I'm always glad to be able to support NAMI here in our communities, because I think you serve such a great purpose and you serve our community so well, and it's so needed. Tonight, I'm veering off a little bit from what's really probably more of my expertise, which is suicide, but we're going to talk about grief. And when I was a therapist, practicing therapist, I did a lot of grief counseling. And so I have a little bit of expertise in that, but not as much. And I'll be really transparent. I found putting this presentation together to be very helpful to me personally right now in my life. My mom is aging. She's in her late 80s. And although doesn't need full-time caregiving, there's more caregiving that is falling to me as her only child. And so I've experienced some of this with not with mental illness particularly, but just with aging and how that grief can come up as someone begins to age and you find yourself as their caregiver. So doing this work, I enlightened myself and educated myself, as well as, I hope, give you some information as well. This is a bit of a heavy subject. And I want to acknowledge that you live this every single day. And
So with that said, please take care of yourself tonight. We're going to be talking for probably about an hour and 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. But we'll also have time as we go along. Please feel free to ask questions as we speak and as I present. It's fine to do that. Raise your hand or just interrupt, unmute yourself, and say, I want to say something or whatever it is you need to say. And I'm fine with that. In fact, I kind of like that to have more natural in-room experience, if you will, with questions. So feel free to do that. Comments are always great. And the other thing that I think is really important to share as we think about this today is sharing, what do we do? How do we get through this personally? And we learn from each other. So if you're comfortable and it feels okay to share about how you manage the grief, share that, but only if you're comfortable, only if it feels okay to do that. If you need to step out for a while, step out. This is a heavy topic. We will touch briefly on suicide because one of the, how do I want to say this? Oftentimes, one of the things that comes up for all of us when we have someone who has mental illness in our life is thoughts of suicide and behaviors and suicide attempts and suicide deaths. So I think it's important that we touch briefly on that, but not in the realm of the person that you're caregiving for, but for you. Because sometimes I think when we're in the midst of all of this, those thoughts can come up for us as well. And so I want to address that a little bit as we talk tonight. So again, take care of yourself. So I was trying to think of some really fancy title for this presentation. And as you can see, I came up with the fanciest of all, caregiver grief. That's the best I could come up with. And I think that really specifies what we're going to be talking about tonight. So let's get started. What's our agenda? We're going to talk a little bit about grief. And we'll talk about caregiver grief, and we'll talk about how to take care of ourselves. And what about when there's a suicide? What if when there's a loss? I'm going to touch on that. And then also touch on what about when it's us? Who should we talk to? Okay, and then we'll talk about support and we'll talk about self-care, because the most important aspect of this conversation tonight is learning to take care of yourself. Even when we're in the midst of all of this, and I know that there's so many things pulling at us, right? That it can be really hard to set aside that time for ourselves, even if it's just 5 minutes. But it's important that we begin that practice. And so we'll talk a bit about that tonight. I have a couple of videos I'm going to show. Hopefully you'll find them helpful. All right. I apologize for noise in the background. That should be it. The doorbell just rang and we dealt with that. So hopefully there won't be any other noise. Okay. I love this quote by Leo Tolstoy, of all folks, right? And he's talking about grief. And he says, there is a certain duality that comes with grief. We see the darkness that it brings, but can also be thankful for what it teaches us. It is difficult for human beings to understand how to hold two conflicting ideas at the same time. But when we learn to do this, we increase our psychological flexibility. You can learn to be thankful for what you have learned from the grief in your life, while simultaneously wishing that it had never occurred in the first place. And when I think about grief, just in general, the broad view of grief, so often it is that. It's that duality. And it is true what he's saying about psychological flexibility. The more we're able to hold those two conflicting emotions or feelings, the more psychologically flexible, and easier is not the right word, but the easier it is for us to learn from the grief and to appreciate what it is. When I was thinking about, as I began to think about this, I thought about how we all sort of have dreams about what we want in our lives. And, you know, it's like when you have a child or you get married or some other major thing and you go to college and you think about the job you're going to get, or out of college, you kind of have this idea, this dream about what it's going to be like. And then things get in the way and shift the dream. And for many of us, when we talk about our loved ones with regards to mental health challenges, we have an idea of what we want our loved one's life to look like and what we hope it looks like and how we hope it will be. And then it shifts and we lose that. We lose that dream, and that becomes grief. And that's what we're here to talk about. How do we deal with that grief that's never ending? Maybe not never isn't the right word, but it goes on. It shifts and changes and lessens, and sometimes it's more, it's flexible, it moves around, but really it's always with us. And so how do we manage that in our day-to-day life? Okay. So when we talk about caregiver grief and mental illness, we think about I loved this when I read this about unsung heroes with mental illness. And we know that mental illness continues to affect millions of people worldwide. In fact, I would say that more and more people are affected with symptoms of mental illness. And it's really important that we acknowledge the heroes in all of this, and that is you, the caregivers. You're the ones that are there on the front lines every day. You're there taking care of your loved one, your family member, your community member, your child, your aunt, your uncle, your friend. You're the ones there right on the front lines dealing with this on a daily basis. The World Health Organization says roughly, and you've probably all heard this before, 1 in 4 people will be affected by a mental health challenge at some point in their life. We look at the global population, that's a quarter of the global population will be affected by mental illness. That's a lot of folks. It's common. And for each person, when you think about this, for each person that has a mental illness, there's someone that's providing support, someone that's helping take care of them. Maybe not every day of their life, but a lot of times, a lot of days of their lives. And for some folks, it's every day of their life. Even though we know that caregivers play this very vital role in giving care to those with mental health challenges, they're often faced with the difficulties themselves. Part of those difficulties are everyone else understanding what the challenges are in taking care of someone continually, especially around mental illness. It can be also difficult because of stigma around mental illness, people not understanding what it's like to deal with this on a daily basis. We need to be able to understand these challenges as communities. We need education. We need people to understand what it is that you're going through and provide in supportive environments, and then help to improve the mental health of everyone involved. So that's the unsung heroes, which is all of you that care for someone with mental health challenges every day and the struggles that it is. And it's up to the communities really to look at how we can improve those, from our individual family communities and friends and that to our broader community, to which I know NAMI does a lot of work around this with our county and with our medical professions, with all of it, it all matters. And we have to include the caregivers in what we're doing for the people that are struggling with the mental health challenge as well. I know that's an ongoing conversation and a much bigger conversation than what we're going to have tonight. But I think it's important that our advocacy addresses some of those things. And our advocacy can be at community forums. It can be writing letters to our congresspeople. It can be, talking to our county officials about getting the services that we need for both those with mental health challenges and also for the caregivers that are on the lines every day. So let's take a look at what caregiver grief is, and let's talk about kind of now that I've given you my little soapbox about it, let's talk about what it is, why it's important, all of that. Let's start with a definition of grief, because overall grief, this definition fits grief, caregiver grief as well as it fits just general grief. And we in this country, in the Western civilization, we don't give a lot of time for grieving anything. And most people, when they look at the word grief, they think of what's the most common thing to think about, right? Is death. Someone died. But grief is so much more than that. And it means so many different things. So according to the Cleveland Clinic, grief is defined as the experience of coping with loss. Most of us think of grief as happening in a painful period, usually following the death of a loved one. Makes sense, right? But grief can accompany any events that disrupt or challenge our sense of normalcy or ourselves. This includes the loss of connections that define us. And I think that sentence right there, that loss of connection, even though we're still connected to our loved one or to our friend, there is a loss that happens around that connection. They change, we change. So it's that ability to understand that loss of connection, and we grieve that loss. Okay. Grief involves coping with the loss, right? Death, divorce, the loss of home are major events that people grieve. Everyone's experience of grief is different, and there are common responses that can be useful to recognize when facing loss. Whether grieving or supporting a grieving person, practice patience as you work through this difficult time. That's one of the most, I think sometimes one of the hardest things is to remain patient, to remain empathic, not just for caregivers, but for everyone when someone is grieving, because all of us grieve differently. I'll use my mom as an example. She hates when I do that. So, so I do it. But she just doesn't let grief get in the way. She's like, okay, fine, it happened. There's nothing I can do about it. Let's move on. And I'm more of the kind that sits with it and experiences it more and understands that it has effect on my physical as well as my emotional well-being. And that loss takes on many different forms. And she's just like, okay, we're done. So it's hard for her to have that patience with me when I'm grieving something. And it's hard for me, frankly, to have patience with her and her way of grieving. So it's different for everyone. Now, there is a different definition for caregiver grief. It actually has its own definition. And it's a little bit the same, but it's also a little bit different. And caregiver grief is that complex emotional process that's experienced by caregivers for someone with a mental health issue. It usually involves a multifaceted loss of the person they knew before the illness, that loss of connection, right? That loss of who they were before. They're not that same person anymore. You may see glimpses of that same person, or that person may come back from time to time, but often you lose a part of that person. The anticipatory grief for the future is also something that we have to think about. And it's different than often anticipatory grief is when you know someone like has terminal cancer. In this case, you may have anticipatory grief. You may know that at some point this loved one is going to die, but you don't know when. And so that grief goes on for a long time. And oftentimes with mental illness in particular, the death is often related to substance use or to suicide. There are, of course, natural causes and other causes, but often when we talk about mental illness, those two things statistically are more prevalent. This may lead to feelings of sadness, guilt, anger, isolation. And this can often happen before the person actually dies. That's that anticipatory part of it. It's a unique and ongoing form of mourning that requires us to do a little bit of work, acknowledging and expressing our feelings. We have to acknowledge them and we have to express them. We have to find a way to talk about those feelings in a place that feels comfortable for us to be able to talk about them. We also have to think about seeking support. What about our support networks? Who do we go to in these situations? And then practicing self-care. You notice it says practicing because it's a continual kind of process with self-care. So this is the difference between general grief, which we may experience some of the emotions and so forth around that, but this is caregiver grief. And especially this was specific to caregiver grief for those who work with people that have mental illness. Okay. So it's a different, interestingly enough, there's different definitions around that. Okay, I'm going to try and show you a YouTube short on caregiver grief, talking a bit about it. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pull up the screen here, go to my desktop. I'm going to walk myself through this. Sorry, I knew I was going to have trouble with this. Let's see. Let me stop sharing. Okay. All right. Now that should, let me see if that works. Sorry, everybody. Okay. There we go. All right. Okay, so this is not going to be great quality, but I'm hoping that you can. Sorry. Oh, some days. You would think after all of these years of using this technology that I would be a master at it. But you
wish that there was a magic bullet that we could fire that would make everything up. One thing we often don't talk enough about when it comes to mental illness and caregivers is the one thing we often don't talk enough about.
All right. I'm almost there. Okay, sorry. I'm going to get it. All right. So I don't know. Can you see it? Can somebody tell me, can you see the guy on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to play this. He's talking about caregiver grief and mental illness. And I thought this was a really good video. It's fairly short, talking about what we go through. Okay. And we don't talk about it. So I'm going to play it now.
One thing we often don't talk enough about when it comes to mental illness and caregivers is the grief that settles in. Loss of things that might have been, that should have been, that now won't be, and really an unending future ahead of us. For so many caregivers, we're struggling. What do I do with that? How do I reconcile my new reality with what I wanted? And the answer is there's no easy answer. We wish that there was a magic bullet that we could fire that would make everything okay. But there is a way through that journey to stop, to talk with others around you, to be honest with ourselves so that we can find our own pathway forward, to become okay with our new reality. That's why we have support groups and education, and why you need a community. Come find out more with us, and we'll walk that journey with you. One thing we often don't talk enough when it comes to mental illness and caregivers is the grief that settles in. Loss of things that might have been, that should have been, that now won't be.
There we go. All right. I shared that because I think it's the thing that we often talk about, which is that we don't talk about it and that we need a community. That's one of the things that's so great about NAMI is that you do have that community, that you can reach out to people who have had that experience. It is a great loss to lose the idea of what you had hoped would be, right? Mother Teresa, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but I read a quote by her that said, it's normal. I can't remember exactly how she said it. It's normal to grieve the loss of what should have been. But what's more important is to live each day right now with what is. And I think there's something that's really helpful in that. If we can learn to, that comes back to that psychological flexibility. If we can learn to accept what is. Now that can be, it sounds really easy. Oh, sure, I'll be able to accept it, no problem. It's a little bit more difficult when it's, in reality. But if we can do that a little bit at a time and practice that, it might be easier. But I thought that was a good video talking about how we need to be able to talk more about this and to get the support that we need for ourselves. Okay, so we know that there's general grief, we know that there's caregiver grief, and we also know that there are stages of grief, right? And interestingly enough, the stages of grief that Kubler-Ross came up with work for caregiver grief just as it does for general grief. And we do go through these stages. Look at the stages, and can you see how maybe you've gone through some of these stages? Although they're very linear here, we have denial. We have to accept that this is a real loss and that this may not ever change. It's not going to be different. And accept that if it does change, it might be great. They might get, our loved one may do better after a period of illness, but then also that may come back and we may have to spend more time caregiving. We may feel angry at multiple sources, at doctors for not knowing what medications to give them, for medications for causing so many side effects, for the person for not wanting to get well or not realizing that they're ill. We may get mad, feel anger towards God. Why'd you give me this challenge? You may feel angry at yourself. Somehow it's your fault that this is happening to your loved one. Or you might just be angry at no one in particular. and that anger can come and go. And then we may bargain. This is the one, this is where I find myself a lot with grief, is I'm bargaining, right? You know, I get to this place and I go, okay, look, if I do this and that happens, then this will, you know, and it doesn't work that way. And even though I know that, I still get there sometimes. So you imagine reaching some sort of an agreement so you don't have to deal with the loss, or that the loss will be lessened, or that if you do this, it will get better. We know that that's not going to happen, but we do it as humans. It's part of the process. We may experience depression. This may not be clinical, you know, major depression or anything like that. Although there are times when you are caregiving and you may find that having medication for your depression might be helpful, or for your anxiety, or for, you know, those things. I'm not discounting any of that. But a lot of times it's not that, you know, it's not more clinical, it's more situational depression. And this can come from those experiences, such complex emotions that happen when someone is grieving a loss. You may find you have brain fog. You may feel more hopeless, helpless, trapped. I think trapped and isolation are big ones that you would feel, that someone that's caregiving might feel. And then eventually we get to acceptance. And then we start all over again. Okay, so Kubler-Ross is known for the grieving process. I know there's others that have come along since Kubler-Ross, and there's different ways of looking at this. I think these really hit the main points when we talk about grieving. Now, here's the thing about grieving. It's linear. We get through it. It goes like that. We're hoping it's going to go just in a nice straight line. But the truth is the experience is not the straight line. It's the mess. It's the squiggles. It's the waves that come when we experience loss. And that's okay. And it doesn't have to be linear. And we don't have to go through any of these stages, to be perfectly honest with you, because each one of us grieves differently. And so as you're sitting there today thinking about your experience with your loss, does this resonate with you? Or does it not? Is it different? Because it could be. There's no perfect way to do this. There's no formula that anyone can give you to make this easier. It's hard. It's a hard thing. But that said, we can learn to do things differently, to take care of our loved ones and to take care of ourselves and to seek the support that we need. And you know what? We can do all of those things and it's still going to be kind of like the squiggly lines, because life is messy and grief comes in waves. And so when it comes in waves, we have a choice. We can surf the wave or we can get pulled under. Let's surf the wave. There is a definitely, and I've been kind of walking around this, but there is an impact to caregiver grief. But before we start talking about this, are there any questions or comments? Oh, I see something in the chat. Oh, that's a really good question. I have the question is this talk applicable for those who have recently lost a loved one to suicide? The title is misleading. Yeah, I had trouble with the title. Yes, I think it is, because the grief is also, it's compounded. So if you've lost a loved one to suicide, chances are good you were also part of their care team. You may not have been a full-time caregiver, but you probably did function in some way as a caregiver for this person. that compounds the grief, because there's the loss you experience, that anticipatory grief, and then the suicide that happened, and there's grief with that. I will touch on suicidal loss in a few minutes, a little more directly, but yeah, I think that there is an overlap there between the person that has lost a loved one to suicide, that may have been a full-time caregiver, may have been just a family member giving care and support, or a friend, and what we go through during the grieving process. But I will speak directly to suicide loss in a few minutes. That's a great question. Yeah, I need a better title. You're absolutely right. Any other comments or questions right now while we're stopped here? Okay, please feel free, ask questions, comments. I love comments. You know, experiences, whatever feels comfortable for you. So let's talk about the impact of caregiver grief, because there is definitely an impact. The first one that they talk about that we've talked about already is loss of the before person, who the person was before they had the mental illness. I remember on the crisis lines there, you know, all those phone calls, right? How can you remember one specific call? You'd be surprised. But I remember speaking to a young man who was a student at one of the universities around here. I don't remember which one. I think it was Berkeley, but not positive. And when he was in his sophomore year at Berkeley, he had his first psychotic break, and he was hospitalized, and he was diagnosed at that point with schizophrenia. And he talked about, when I was talking to him, I remember this because it really like touched my heart. He talked about what he had lost of having that experience, which was that he didn't ever return to school because he didn't think he would be able to do that. Now, his perception, I don't know, but you could hear the loss of who he was before the break, and then who he was after. And I would imagine that his family, his friends also experienced that loss of who he was before. And that's not, interestingly enough, I remember that particular one, but I also remember talking to lots of folks that had similar experiences when it comes to mental health challenges and the loss of who they were before. We also experience that. We experience the loss of who they were before the illness, before the medication, before the treatments, before whatever it was. We experience that as well. There's a comment. Okay, how does anticipatory grief differ from PTSD when your young adult child was only diagnosed with bipolar disorder 9 months before their suicide while living and working overseas? Wow, there was barely any time to learn about the diagnosis. Yeah, that's pretty quick. So anticipatory grief is actually something a little bit different than PTSD when we look at it diagnostically. And I don't know that that's going to be helpful, you know, for you. PTSD is a response to a trauma. Anticipatory grief is related to a specific loss, usually of some sort. Now, I suppose they could overlap for sure, and you may experience both. That because of the anticipatory grief, you may experience that. And the PTSD may also show up very similar sort of symptoms that you might experience, not sleeping, nightmares, startle responses, things triggering the fight, flight, freeze response. Those are pretty typical of PTSD. Anticipatory grief, you don't usually have those particular symptoms. You have more of the depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, yes. And there could be more without getting into a really long conversation. But yeah, it could be both. And then 9 months before their suicide, yeah, there's, considering they were diagnosed with a bipolar disorder in such a short period of time, it would be really hard to really to accept that loss and to understand what had happened. It would be really challenging, and that would add another layer onto the level of grief, and potentially PTSD because of that. So that would be, you're right, and they're living out of the country. They're not available to you right here. So you may not know those things. Oh, borderline personality disorder. Sorry. I looked at that and saw bipolar disorder. Yeah, there was barely any, you're right, there was barely any time to learn about the diagnosis. So that can increase the grieving process as well, because someone would, with suicide loss, one of the things that happens a lot with folks that lose a loved one to suicide is self-blame. I should have known, I should have done more, I didn't do the right thing, I should have, whatever their should haves are, but, and that adds an additional layer to the grief that you're experiencing. I'm really sorry for that loss. It must be very difficult to understand and to grieve, and it's been such a short time. We talk about suicide loss, and I'll touch on this again, but we talk about suicide loss that it takes a year from the time of the loss to really just stop feeling numb, and to be able to kind of start re-engaging in life. A year is not unusual. When I was seeing clients that were loss survivors, sometimes it was 2 or 3 years. But you can move forward, and it just takes time. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I wish I had a better answer for you. But thank you for sharing that. We'll talk a little bit more about suicide loss survivors in a few minutes. Okay. Anyone else have any comments? Thoughts? So we're talking about the two things that are on the slide, the first two things, the loss of the before person, and their personalities change, their behaviors change, and your relationship changes. That doesn't mean it's bad, it just changes. And then there's the anticipatory grief. This is the grief felt before the actual loss, right? This is kind of the ongoing nature of mental health challenges, and the awareness that the person's condition may worsen or the role of the caregiver will eventually end. And we may experience anticipatory grief throughout our caregiving experience. Short-term or long-term, we may have that kind of grief. Well, also there's a loss of independence that comes when we're a caregiver. We lose some of our own independence because we have a responsibility to someone else. We lose some of our freedom, and our personal life often pays the price for that. And usually, a lot of times, I think part of that price is we're isolating ourselves and we're tired. We have a lack of energy to do the things that we were doing before. because caregiving is exhausting. And so that loss of independence can be a huge impact to caregiver grief. Emotional exhaustion and distress is the other big impact. Caregiving is physically and emotionally exhausting. That's why we have to take care of ourselves. That's why we have to take time out to rest and to regroup. Now, I know that some of you are sitting there thinking, easy for you to say, lady. You know, it's much harder to do. And that's why it's a practice. That's why we have to work at it. Not doing these things, not taking care of our emotional exhaustion can lead to higher risks of anxiety, depression, helplessness, loneliness, worthlessness. We could go on. Okay. So taking care of that emotional exhaustion is really important. Caregivers often feel very complex emotions, and there are a wide range of emotions, like we saw with the stages of grief. They can include anger, impatience, resentment. We can feel resentment toward the person we're caring for. We love them, or we wouldn't be doing this. If we didn't love the person, if we didn't care about the person, we wouldn't be doing it. But we also may feel resentment. Two conditions, right? And then we also may feel, even in the moment of sadness, we may feel relief that our job as a caregiver is over. And so those can be very complex emotions. You often feel this when the duties are over, when a person passes away or something like that after a terminal illness. Often a person will say they felt relief. Relief that their suffering was gone. Relief that their pain was over. Relief that you didn't have to do this anymore. And that's very normal. That can also bring up a lot of guilt for folks. Complex emotions, right? They can be very complex. It's important to remember that grief is unpredictable and it's unique to the individual caregiver. You may not feel any of these things, or you may feel all of these things. That's part of the grieving process. And each of us do it individually. We're not going to all do it the same. Okay. Let's talk about some experiences. There are 3 issues that may impact the experience of the caregiver that we should really be aware of. One of them is unpredictability. We never know day to day what's going to happen. That can create fear and uncertainty, and a certain unpredictable nature to our lives, right? Mental health conditions are unpredictable. We never know when someone's going to be in crisis. Usually there are indications that someone is heading towards a crisis, but we may not know. We may not get called until the height of the crisis. So, that can be a very challenging part of this, of caregiving. There's also the idea of relapses. Someone's doing really well for a long period of time. They've been on medication, they're going to therapy, they're in an outpatient program, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden they relapse. Maybe they start using drugs again, start drinking again, or they stop taking their medication, a pretty common one. Their behaviors escalate. They become maybe more irritable, aggressive. Maybe they have to be hospitalized again. And they may also begin to have more suicidal ideation, and they may have suicide attempts. This is the unpredictability of it. You never know. And that's hard to live with. I remember Kevin Hines talking about his father after Kevin's suicide attempt. Kevin is one of those folks that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and lived. And it's interesting because one of the things that he said about it was, and this speaks to the unpredictability, right, is that every time the phone rings, his father wonders, is Kevin alive? So there's a level of not knowing what's going to happen next. that can create a lot of anxiety in our bodies and in our minds about what's happening, and can also make it really hard to respond to things. We also have to look at relationships. Whoops, I have a misspelling there. And remember that relationships are complex. And relationships with people with mental health challenges can be challenging because of what they're going through. And it can be challenging for us. And so we may feel feelings of instability, loss of emotional connection. They may be angry at us. There's a wide range of things that can happen in relationships. And sometimes relationships break down. And people may leave our lives for a while. And then there's the stigma. It always comes down to this, whether we talk about mental health or suicide or drug use, substance use, it always comes down to the stigma that's associated in our society with mental health, with suicide, and with substance use. They're the three things that we blame people for. We just blame them. They should have been better. And so instead of the blame, what would be more helpful is to actually be able to talk about what's going on and have support around mental health, substance use, suicide. This can contribute to a lot of feelings of isolation because you feel like you can't talk to anyone and that no one will understand. So these are often three of the really strong emotions that caregivers experience as they're grieving. So then the question becomes, all right, so we've talked all about this grieving stuff. Great. How do I know when I'm just plain burned out? Right? So let's talk about burnout for a minute, because burnout happens, and I think it happens to those who do caregiving a lot. Okay, I think this is something that happens a lot to people. And so I love this quote about burnout. We think that the point is to pass the test or overcome the problem, but the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy. That's the game. That's what we want to work at. That's what we want to practice. I really love that quote, especially the middle part where it comes together and it falls apart. And we do that over and over. And then the goal is to just let that happen and understand it for what it is and look for the room for all of it, to hold all of it in our lives. So caregiver burnout is a state of emotional, physical, mental exhaustion that occurs when a person provides long-term care to a loved one, family member, or friend. It's the kind of tiredness you can't fix. With a single good night's sleep or a walk in the park, it's often often the result of long-term unchecked stress. So what do we do to check our stress? We learn to do things that relieve our stress. And there can be lots of things that relieve our stress. Think about something right now as you're sitting here that can relieve your stress. And if you would, share it in the chat. I think because of time, I'm going to skip the video because it's 6 minutes long and it's 8:02. I want to have plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm going to skip it. But there's some great things in the chat about what to do when you're stressed. Take a hike. Yeah, nature's great. Listen to my favorite song. Hanging out with my grandkids, always a good one. Walk on a beach. Fortunately, we've got lots of beaches in the area, right? Play piano. Yeah, those are the things that we do to relieve our stress. Those are the things that are important. If you're sitting there and you're thinking, I don't have anything, look to your colleagues here, your friends. What do they do? Can I take a hike? How about ride a bike? How about go for a walk? Are those the things I can do? Great. Doing all the life tasks slowly, one thing at a time. Yeah, especially when you're overwhelmed. I had some changes at work recently, and again, probably too much information, but I'm grieving a little bit because my longtime boss of over 20 years, 25 years, actually, she's been with the agency 25 years, resigned. And so I'm grieving that loss, and I've gotten lost in all the tasks. And so this is one that I'm going to take away tonight to reduce my stress, which is to put everything down, what I need to do, and then do them one at a time until I can check them off my list. So thank you, Tanya, for sharing that, because I'm going to take it away with me tonight. So these are the things to do. These are the things to look for when we talk about how do you deal with it? What do you do? There are some common causes of burnout. The big one is caregiving, that prolonged stress, the strain of caregiver responsibilities. If you can, share those responsibilities with others, with other members of the family. I know sometimes that's really hard because family members may also be burned out. Lack of sleep, poor diet, lack of exercise. Think about how much sleep did you get last night? Uninterrupted? Be honest with yourself. I know I got about 5 hours sleep last night, uninterrupted. What we need is 7 to 8. 6 to 8 would be okay. So look at your sleep hygiene. How's your diet? Are you eating a lot of sugary, fat things? And we do that sometimes as comfort food for sure. But if that's the bulk of your diet, maybe some diet changes would be helpful. Are you exercising? And I don't mean you have to go run, 5 miles or whatever. But are you getting out? Are you moving? Are you just getting out and moving? That's the goal. Okay. How's finances? Sometimes caretaking, your finances take a huge hit. And that can be very difficult to deal with. Isolation, social withdrawal. How can you get back into your social group? Just those feelings of overwhelmed and helplessness and feelings of resentment can cause burnout. It's important that we understand that all of us experience burnout from time to time in our lives, in our jobs, in our lives, in our home lives. It's a pretty common occurrence for people that live in the US, I think probably live around the world. Being aware of that, though, and being able to then take some steps to alleviate that burnout can be really helpful. Here are some common signs of caregiving burnout. Any of these ring true for you guys? Easily flustered, tired, uninterested in things that you used to love to do or enjoy doing, being more forgetful or foggy, quick to anger, losing your temper, irritability, anxious or depressed, feeling hopeless or helpless. These are pretty common signs of burnout. There's some additional signs of burnout as well. You may have muscle pain. Physical pain can be a sign that something is going on in your body. It should be checked out by your MD to make sure it's not something going on. A lot of times your emotional pain will show up as physical pain. Again, with the sleep, get some sleep. Nothing really surprising on this slide. Difficulty concentrating though, and forgetfulness, some cognitive decline is also pretty normal when we're experiencing burnout. You may have changes in appetite. You may lose or gain weight. There may be an increased substance use for the caregiver as well. And then thoughts of suicide or wanting to be dead. Okay, these are some of the additional symptoms of burnout. Since we've talked a little bit about suicidal thoughts, I do want to touch on this briefly, and then we'll talk about self-care. Sometimes when caregivers are taking care of someone else, they may also have thoughts of suicide. These thoughts can be incredibly distressing for people. The most important thing to remember is you don't have to deal with this alone. There are people there that want to help and that can help. You don't have to do this by yourself. If you have thoughts of suicide, reach out for support from family, from friends, other community supports, crisis lines, whomever you reach out to them. If you're concerned about someone and think they might be thinking about suicide, ask them. Just ask. You won't make them more suicidal if you ask. If you're in a room with someone, or you have a friend that's in a caregiving position like you are, and they've seemed really hopeless and they've seemed really down and more depressed or anxious, they may not say anything directly about suicide. They may say something more like, I'm just so tired, I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. You want to ask what that means. So don't be afraid to ask about suicide. You're not going to make them suicidal. They'll want to be able to finally talk about it, just like you want to be able to talk about it when you're feeling that way. And the hope is that someone will ask you. If you don't know who you can talk to, or you're concerned about someone and you don't know what to do, call a crisis line. We're there 24/7 and can support people through suicidal thoughts. The easiest way to get in touch with a crisis line is by dialing 988. Today is 988 Day, as a matter of fact. And tomorrow is World Suicide Prevention Day. So just, FYI. Okay, let's talk for a minute. We've talked again briefly about this already. What happens when a loved one dies by suicide? This is a more complicated grief, especially if you're a caregiver or family member, friend. Just as with all illnesses, sometimes they lead to death, and that's true with suicide as well. Okay. Mental illness, sometimes the outcome, you'll hear people talk about suicide as the outcome, if you will, of a mental health challenge. That's the medical diagnosis, is the suicide. This can be a complicated grieving process for those that are caring for the person that died, for the family, for the community. There's a large range of emotions that can be had when someone has lost a loved one to suicide. They'll go through those stages of grief. And they also may feel numb. They may hear their loved one's voice. They may have, if they were there at the time of their loved one's death, they may have flashbacks to that. That could, in fact, trigger post-traumatic stress for sure. Sometimes we find our loved ones after they've taken their life. That can take a long time to go through and to process that. You may also be relieved that this is over. It's recommended that when someone dies by suicide, that no major decisions are made the first year after their death. And that, in fact, when you go for therapy, and it is recommended that when you have a loss by suicide, that you do seek professional help. Our agency is one of the agencies that can provide that, but there's lots of others that have these kinds of groups available too. That you wait for the first few months before you start therapy. It's normal to feel guilt, to feel like you should have done something to change it. But the truth is that people do everything they can to help their loved one. And sometimes, even though we do the very best we can, sometimes people die by suicide. And we can't change that. So that's that grief that stays with us throughout our lives. And it changes and it lessens, but it's still there. The most important thing is if you lose a loved one to suicide, don't do this by yourself. Get the support that you need. Be sure you go to groups that specialize in suicide loss. See a therapist that has experience with working through grief, especially suicide loss grief. Our agency, like I said, Crisis Support Services, we can provide that kind of therapist. Okay. Here's some information about crisis lines. Has to be in every one of my presentations. Easiest way to reach us, 988. Okay, that's the easiest way. We have 140 languages. We're available 24/7, not just for you, but for anybody in the community and your loved one. Make sure they have a crisis line number. And even if they will, call us with them so that they know what it's like to call the crisis line. We have a text line that's 24 hours. You're always welcome to text us. Safe to 20121. Okay. And then there's the national numbers as well, which is 988. If you're a veteran, press 1. If you want Spanish, press 2. You can text us, text 988 in California. You're sent to whatever center is available. And there's also Spanish and actually the Pride stuff is no longer available. Okay. Funding for that is stopped.
The funding for that, was it national?
Yes, it was national. The administration stopped the funding in July for, it was option number 3 on 988, and it went to the Trevor line. The Trevor line is still working. It always has been. It always will be. There's just no direct line for when you call 988 if you're in the LGBT community. Okay. I wish I had an answer for your question. Maybe someone else. Let's come back to that in the Q&A, to the question in the chat. I'll come back. Okay, so what do we do to take care of ourselves? How do we do that? Well, let's breathe, shall we? Let's spend a minute here. It's 8:15. Let's do 10 minutes for Q&A, but before we start that, let's talk about in the moment, what can we do to take care of ourselves? And this is called box breathing. So let's try it. We're going to breathe in to a count of 4. So everybody breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can make noise when you breathe out, it works better. And then pause for a count of 4, just normal, and then do it again. Slowing down your breathing resets your body. So if you're upset or you're feeling really stressed, breathing can be a very simple way to kind of gain some, get more grounded. I used to do this when I was in therapy room with a client and they were telling me something that was really difficult. I would do the breathing because they didn't know I was doing it. but it helped center me. Taking care of yourself. I don't want to harp on this. Yes, I do. So let's talk about that for a minute. Get enough sleep. Everything I read about caregiver grief, the first thing they talked about was get enough sleep. Sleep is when our bodies rejuvenate. Sleep is when our bodies heal. It's when a time when we can, have our brains heal and our physical bodies heal. So 6 to 8 hours is ideal. Okay, we know we can't always get that. Do your best. Practice sleep hygiene, no screens. I had to learn this myself. I'd frequently have my tablet in bed with me at night. I had to stop that. Cool, dark room. This was something that I have trouble sleeping, okay? So full disclosure. So I've tried all of these. I find that leaving my window open just a little bit to get some fresh air in the room really helps. Have a bedtime ritual. What do you do before you go to bed? Drink some water. Do you have a cup of chamomile tea? What do you do right before you go to bed? And then if you really have a lot of trouble sleeping, no caffeine after 4 p.m. is one of the things that they say is really helpful. No caffeinated drinks, no Coke, no coffee, no tea. Okay. Eat and hydrate. Make sure you're drinking enough water. Most of us are not hydrated enough. We need to drink more water. Stay hydrated. Eat well. Choose healthy food when you can. Get moving. And I don't mean don't take a 20-mile hike or anything. Just get outside. Be in nature. If you have grass around, take your shoes off and walk on the grass if it's safe to do that. You can do it on dirt too, but whatever. Sand works. Feel the sun on your back or your neck. Take a walk. If possible, do all these things with a friend. Set boundaries. The best self-care you have is setting boundaries. Learn when to say no. I can't do it. I won't do it. It's not okay for me. It may feel mean. It may feel really hard for you, but setting boundaries is helpful to you and to the other person. It's one of the things I learned on the crisis line when I first started working there. I had to learn how to set boundaries, and I was not good at it, let me tell you, because they often feel like it felt so mean to do it, but it wasn't for either one of us. Take a break from it all. When possible, turn off. Let loved ones know you are off the grid. How long is up to you? Half a day, a week, 20 minutes, doesn't matter. Go out of town, head to the coast. We're so lucky to live here where we have so many places we can go if we want to do those sort of things. Or better yet, stay home with a good book and a cup of your favorite tea. Those are the things that work to take care of ourselves. Find a support network. You've got one here at NAMI. Get other ones. Find other ones. Find a support group, a professional support group. They can be online or in person. Seek therapy. When you feel really overwhelmed, like you just can't manage, seek some professional help around that. Therapy helps process the feelings, and it's nice to have another person that can provide that support outside of my friends, and I need those, but sometimes it's more objective when it's someone outside of all of that. Arrange for respite care when you can. There are some places here in the Bay Area, in Alameda County, that do respite care. I know it's very difficult to get into, but if if that works for you, try that. Set realistic expectations. You cannot be everything to everyone. It's not possible. Ask for help. Seek support. Set boundaries. Rest. Love yourself. Give yourself grace. Give yourself the same grace that you would give to someone else. Okay? Show gratitude. Those are the things that really help. All right. I liked this too. This quote about caregiving is about holding space for people. Okay, questions, thoughts, comments? We have about 9 minutes. So if, first of all, before I go any further, thank you. I appreciate you sitting through this, and I hope it was helpful, at least that you got a couple of nuggets you can take away. And thank you for all that you do for your loved ones and for our community. So now, questions, thoughts, comments?
Okay, I'm gonna break the silence.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I mean, as a family member, multiple family members that are in need of a lot of caregiving, and I say it often that I and my car are very tired. We go everywhere to help family. Um, I really appreciate you throwing in the elements that helps us to step back and become more aware of what we're doing and when to stop and
Yeah.
take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When to stop, that's the key there. Elle, you raised your hand? Oh,
Me?
Uh, well,
Oh,
go ahead, Elle.
hi there. Thank you so much. Thank you for this presentation. Yeah, so I just wanted to know, I think I put in the chat, like, now that the crisis, everything is over, but it was such a whirlwind. Um, Now I'm picking up the pieces and just trying to make sense of everything. And so just, is there someone in community mental health, crisis services? I mean, I'd like to learn about the system because I do have to attend an inquest in the UK. And, I just also want to know, I want to advocate. My child was working, very independent, very overachiever, but she got physically sick, with physical illness and also mental illness. And it was all diagnosed like within 9 months, and then boom, then she's dying. She died. So I just want to understand the system so that when I'm in court listening to all this, I can ask questions. I can, it's all a whirlwind. So is there someone I can learn from?
yeah, I don't know exactly. I don't know, Marcia, if you know of anyone. The one thing I will say is their system in the UK is very different than ours.
Yes.
I don't know, good or bad, I don't know, but I know it's different. And I don't know how much of it would be applicable from our system to their system. But I would say if you wanted to learn more about what we do in community mental health, that you start with Alameda County Behavioral Health Care.
Okay.
I don't have their number offhand, but you can look it up on the web. They may be able to refer you to someone that could kind of walk you through it. You also might want to try contacting someone over in the State Department to see if you can find out the system in the UK. I don't know if they would do anything like that, but that would be my only other thought.
Yeah, no, they do. They do. I mean, she was seeing private, and also she was involved in community mental health. I did a crisis assessment. I would imagine it would be similar here. But I just kind of wanted to know that so that when I'm listening in the inquest, that it's familiar to have a baseline. I believe it would be familiar too. Once they get discharged, somebody comes visits them, you know, those kind of things. So I just kind of wanted to know the basics of what it's like.
You know what? I'm going to put my email address in here, in the chat. If you want to email me, I'll see if I can find someone that can give you some information.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I'm just I was very involved, you know, like, you know, I have the PTSD, the anticipatory grief, everything. It's going to be a year in October. And then the coroner is going to have an inquest, and I've been asking for records and things like that. But I mean, the biggest thing, the hardest thing for me is that they're telling me, well, she was an adult. She didn't want you involved in her care. Yet we were texting all the time. I was supporting her when she was on medical leave. So, you know, that's kind of hurtful from
Yeah.
their standpoint. Like, we can't release the records because she didn't give you consent. So, you know, I just kind of want to know
Well,
what
that is very similar to what we do here. You would be told
yeah,
the same thing. She's an adult. She didn't want you involved. There's nothing we can do. You
Yes,
know,
that rings true. Yes.
yeah, that definitely rings true. But shoot me off an email and I'll see if I
Okay.
can find, I'll talk to my department director or our executive director and see if I can get you any information about that. She may even have access to information about the UK. I don't know, but I can certainly ask and send it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, we're almost out of time.
Yeah, Chris, you see, you said even if you reach one person, it's worth it. You got 11 of us listening, and you definitely is reaching across. Everyone is resonating with the message. My comment here is that
Armin,
I
we've
educate.
got someone help with their hand up. We got Tanya, so don't,
Okay,
Oh,
please,
Tanya,
please,
yes,
please
sorry,
thank,
go.
yeah.
Tanya.
Oh, my question is not urgent. Just was curious. You had mentioned that you supported the crisis helpline and that you took calls and you had to learn to set boundaries. It is difficult to set boundaries with our loved ones with mental illness. Um, that training, are there are there specific things that seemed counterintuitive that you could share that you felt were very helpful? Or did they give you a book or some kind of training? How did that work? Because, yeah, that sounds like a very difficult and rewarding experience at the same time.
Are you talking about strictly boundary setting?
Yeah,
Okay,
let's just go with boundary setting. We don't have a
okay,
lot of time, so I'll,
great.
I'll focus on that.
What I learned about boundary setting was that the boundary isn't about the other person, it's about you. And so we would often, it was my responsibility if there was a boundary set to hold the boundary, right? I always kind of thought it was about the other person, but it actually isn't. When there's a boundary set, then it's my responsibility to hold that boundary. I'll give you an example. We used to have a guy that would call and scream on the crisis line. He would just scream. He'd be frustrated. He'd get to this point and he'd just scream. And the boundary with him was that you gave him one opportunity to rein it in, or you'd hang up and tell him to call back when he could talk. And I thought that was terrible. I mean, this guy obviously is really upset, blah, blah, blah. But my mentor, her name was Joyce, taught me really quickly that when I break the boundary, it doesn't help him learn how to be in the world every day. That boundary that we set with him was to help him so he didn't get arrested at the bus stop, so that the police didn't come if he was standing in the middle of a street screaming. It was really important that I held that boundary, even though it was hard and I didn't want to. And that's how boundaries are. They can be very hard for us to hold, but it's our job to hold them for the other person. And often when we're dealing with mental health stuff, it is so that the other person doesn't get arrested, because we know that people with mental health challenges, if they're acting out, can get arrested, right? And end up in Santa Rita or, in another jail or whatever. And so we don't want that to happen. So setting boundaries helps them learn as well what they can and can't do in the public and in the world and in their families. And so although they're difficult, that's how we learn to set them on the crisis line. And on the crisis line, often when we set a boundary like that, it goes through our clinical department to make sure that it's sound clinically. And then it's our responsibility as the crisis counselor to hold that boundary. But it's the same thing. If you're at home and you're the parent or the loved one or the friend, you're going to hold those boundaries. You can set them and you can hold them. I hope that helps.
No, that was very interesting. I was thinking about that because, yeah, no, it's hard because
It
we
is.
have to do that all day, every day, right?
Right. Yes. And it's tiring. And sometimes it's easier just to give in. And if you do that, oh, well, that's what we do sometimes. It's, it's no shame or blame or anything about that. But if we can, hold the boundary. Thanks. All right. We're late. It's 8:33 again. Thank you all so very much for being here. I know it's hard after a day's work and doing all the things that you do to come and listen to someone talk about caregiving. So thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. NAMI, thank you for all the work that you guys do. I just, I can't say enough good things about Tri-Valley NAMI and all the wonderful support that they give. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Chris.
you.